Hello, everybody. It's Mr. Drainbell, and today we're going to continue down and finish our deuterostomes. So when we're looking at deuterostomes, we've kind of gone through our fishes, we've gone through our amphibians, we've gone through our reptile clade, and now we're looking at our mammal clade. Mammals are a synapomorphic clade, and the synapomorphies that are a monophyletic clade, with the major synapomorphies being the presence of milk to nourish their young, as well as really specialized muscles in the mouth that allow, or around the mouth in the cheeks and lip area, that allow for suckling. These are mammal traits. Now, a lot of mammals are also going to have fur. That's going to be developed, some cases secondarily lost. All mammals are going to be endotherms. They're going to be endothermic. They're endothermic in a different way, metabolically, than those of our birds and crocodilians. And they're going to like I said, to kind of have that fur made of keratin. It's going to overlie our body and help provide insulation. We have three major groups of mammals. Our first group is the monotremes that are going to have 5 extant species. These guys are pretty much all endangered. The entire clade is looking at potentially being lost. This clade includes the platypus and 4 echidna species. These are oftentimes referred to as the spiny anteaters. These guys are kind of unique in the fact that they're egg layers. So they give birth to an egg, and that egg develops later. There is high parental care, but again, they're not live birth. They're not going to have the teat structure that we're going to see in the next two. So instead of having a specialized gland that is going to produce milk, what they're going to have is they're going to sweat milk, and it's going to be more generalized. So they're going to have the pores and glands that are related to it, but they're not localized into this external structure we call the teat. And we do see individuals, primarily the male platypus, as being venomous. So this group is kind of unique in that we do see venom production here. Now, our second group is the marsupial group. Marsupials are pouch mammals. These guys are going to be mostly distributed to the southern hemisphere. A few individuals have made it up north. In North America, there's only one, our Virginia possum, which is this guy right here, migrated from South America into North America and successfully established a foothold on its own, even though they were later moved throughout the United States by fur traders. They were known to have moved into Mexico, what is today Mexico, and up as high as some of the southern states, but are now seen throughout the United States and North America. These guys are going to give birth to very underdeveloped young that are going to crawl into their pouch, and they're going to remain in the pouch till they're fully developed. And the teat structure, the feeding structure, is going to be internal of the pouch. In today's world, we're going to see the majority of these guys in Australia. Historically, they were spread pretty heavily through Australia, Antarctica, into South America and regions of Africa. And as these southern parts of the main continent rammed into the northern parts, placental mammals moved in and tended to outcompete them because they have a little bit better reproduction than are marsupials. So they're able to outcompete marsupials in almost every region where they're found. Placental mammals, we are a placental mammal. Placental mammals give birth to very developed young. Again, it's highly variable in our group. Humans have very underdeveloped, very uh, reliant young on their parents, as do most primates. But they're not as underdeveloped as something like a rodent, where we could see down here, where they're typically hairless, blind. Um, but then we see some other young, like something like a deer or some of our hoofed animals, where they're up and running within an hour and they're expected to be able to keep up with their parents. So those guys, you know, the range of development is very variant, but in all cases, these guys are the most developed young in the mammal clade uh, by far. There's extensive parental care. Parents stay with their youngs for a long time, and the young are typically fully weaned before they leave. And they're widespread and ecologically diverse. As far as the megafauna or the large fauna, the fauna we interact with, this is the most diverse group, right? So I talked about like insects being the most diverse group, but they're kind of classified as this microfauna, the small fauna. The megafauna, mammals have kind of dominated our planet. Now, what makes a placental mammal important is this idea of the placenta. The placenta is a modified uh, structure that is going to instead of like with the allantois, where you put the waste into a kind of like a bladder structure that's going to hold the waste off to the side. This is modified into the placenta, and the placenta is going to be an area where nutrient waste and gases are exchanged with the mother. Now, the blood is not. So the embryo has its own blood type, right? And that blood is consistent with the placenta. And so in the placenta, what you're going to have is you're going to have two capillary beds that are very close to each other that are going to allow this gas exchange, right? Not blood exchange, just gas and nutrient exchange. Now, some antibodies and things like that will move from the mother to the offspring. That gives our offspring a very important advantage in the fact that some of the mother's immune system is given to the offspring. And even though it's not 100% successful in this, our offspring are not born with the complete immune system of their mother, they are born with more immunity and than most. And this is one of the theories that have led behind this placental mammal strength and why we are able to outcompete the larger like reptiles and even the other mammals group, because we give this kind of learned to our offspring through this ability to exchange um, antibodies and whatnot. And even though, like I said, only a small portion goes, it's still a little bit better. Um, and so this placenta is going to exchange water, exchange gases, nutrients, waste, and it's going to allow the baby to stay longer. It's going to give the baby a little bit of an advantage, little bit of a head start in the immune system, which is going to be further developed when you think about like through the milk, right? Which is why if you have children or if you're going to have children, they oftentimes tell you to breastfeed the baby because, again, they're getting exposed to those antibodies from the mother's milk that are going to help. And all of this has given us an evolutionary advantage to fighting disease and staying strong. So that's one of the advantages of viviparity in the placenta, right? The other one is it gives a constant favorable temperature. offspring are protected, and they're very portable. And unlike like the pouch gives a lot of that. The temperature is fairly constant inside the pouch. They're protected. They're definitely portable, but they can fall out. And then you lose that infant in the uterus. They're not going to fall out. And so that's really the difference. So the pouch was developed into this extended uterus with the placenta. Oops. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of walk through the development of man, right? And so when we look at this, we want to take a look at primates. Primates were probably one of the most ancestral mammals. There's a lot of argument over whether or not the first mammals were reptiles or primates. It seems to be one of the two. And so we have these kind of prosimian primates, and then we have the anthropoid primates. And so the prosimian primates are going to be the primates with the longer nose, and they're going to look more animal or rodent-like, right? And so that's what we've got up here. Those prosimian mammals. We could see they've got this much more developed snout, much more kind of cat-like ears. They're going to have more of a quadrupedal locomotion. They're going to be on all fours more, right? So we're looking at like these lemurs, podos, lorises, and tarsiers. These are your prosimian. They're much more ancestral in a lot of their development. And again, like I said, a little bit more rodent-like. When we get into our anthropoids, these are our monkeys and apes, and these are going to have more of that human look, which is why they're anthropoid, human-like, right? And so what we see is we see a much more flat face. We still see the frontal developed eyes, right? But we see that the pinnae reduced into what we call an auricle, which is our type of ear. We see the grasping hand much more developed with that pronated thumb, so that it can come around and we can touch our thumb to our other fingers. This is an anthropoid development, right? And so when we look at our anthropoids, right, we're gonna see the next group looks at the apes, which is really from this clade on. And so we're going to see these New World monkeys. These are the monkeys found in the Americas, and they're going to have tails that are capable of being used. They're not. They're capable of wrapping around tree branches. They can hang from them, things like that. And so those guys are going to be over here. Now, in this group, right, we have this guy who is one of our, the spider monkey, as they're commonly known as, is one of our individuals who is a very high tool use animal. And in some scientists' view, these guys have entered into the Stone Age. And so when we think about the Stone Age and development, what we're talking about is the ability of an animal to use a tool to create a tool. This separates, we have tool use animals, and most monkeys and apes can use some form of tools. What separates a tool animal from an animal that has entered into the Stone Age is this idea of using a tool to make a tool. So they would grab a rock and slam it against another rock to break a sliver off, and then use that sliver like a knife, right? That is using a tool to make a tool. That Stone Age level development, and the capuchin monkey or spider monkey is capable of doing that. And they have some pretty complex tool use, even connecting tools and stones and sticks together to create tools. So these guys are very smart. So we're seeing very high development intellectually out of the New World monkeys, right? And then in the Old World monkeys, we see very high development intellectually into the ape clade. Now, your Old World monkeys are present. These guys, they're still very smart for animals are concerned. They're up there very highly. Their tails are not usable. They're kind of more for balance. They're more like a cattail. They're a balancing tool. They're not an extra appendage. When we get into the great apes have lost their tail. So they typically don't have a tail, or the tail is greatly reduced. We still have a tail. There's 5 vertebrae that extend beyond the pelvic girdle, but you're not going to see an external tail. And so that's what's going to separate the apes from the monkeys, is this loss of tail. When we get into the apes, we have our orangutans, gorillas, humans, and chimpanzees, right? And so if you look back here, we have our gibbons, right? So this is our ape clade. This is our ape clade. Okay, so the gibbon is considered to be an ape, but not a great ape. It's kind of that intermediate. It doesn't have a tail, but it also lacks a lot of those extra structures that the brain development, the body plan, that more upright posture, or what we call the knuckle walking posture. These are all things that we've separated out with great apes. So key characteristics for the great apes is that they're all large. They're very big. Our smallest humans are around the smallest. The chimpanzees aren't as tall as us, but they tend to be a little bit heavier than us. The bonobo tends to be right around where we are, right about 100 kilograms. And then when we start thinking about like the gorillas and orangutans, these guys are upwards of 200 to 400 kilograms. They're huge in comparison. So we've got this large body plan, typically elongated arms with short legs. Humans are the exception to this. Most great apes have longer arms than legs, and they're going to create this knuckle walking posture where they've got this short leg structure, right, that looks like this. And then they're going to have almost a 45-degree angle here. And then they're going to have this arm structure that comes down, and then their hands curl over, and they walk on the back portion of their hands, or knuckle walk, right? And so they create this unique posture that looks like this, where their hips are at a 45-degree angle to their leg, and then their head is upright. Okay, and we see their head up here. And so this is the typical great ape. And so what happens is we see the front limb is slightly longer than the back limb. Now with humans, as we went to the full upright posture, right? I'm going to draw a little triangle because I'm not a very good artist for the hip. Then we see our leg, right? Our knee and our leg, and we're going to have our foot here. And then I'm going to kind of hang the arm forward, right, with our hand. And so what happens here is the front limb shortened as we became upright. So the arms shortened and the legs elongated. And our body posture, the angle here went to 180 degrees. And so our spine is in line. I know it didn't draw it very well, but our spine is in line with our legs. And this is the difference between the human-like great apes, and there are several of us, from the other great apes. Again, the other things that we see, like I said, no tail. They have that unique way of walking, of either knuckle walking or upright bipedal locomotion. Now the hominids, which are going to be your group that break off from the great apes that give rise to humans eventually, are going to have that bipedal walking, that almost 180 degree orientation between the legs and the backbone, and the elongated legs, as their front limbs are no longer needed to support their body. So when we look at human evolution, I know we oftentimes see this like as a single line where you have your chimpanzee, right? And then we see it, we see kind of this upright person, and then eventually they're drawn up like this, right? And then sometimes there's like this joke where they wind up in a chair because we're lazy and we're stuck in front of the computer because we're all in quarantine and having to do this the crappy way that we're having to do it, right? Well, this is not how this works. This is not evolution of hominids. What actually happened is when we look at this, we have our great ape clade, right? And over here is our hominid clade. And we're going to see groups of branches of trees that look like this, right? And eventually we're going to wind up with humans. And then over here, we're going to see our chimpanzees. And they're going to have a whole bunch of trees with a whole bunch of branches. And eventually, off of one of these branches, you're going to wind up with chimpanzees and bonobos as what's left. And so this isn't a linear thing. The reason why chimpanzees still exist is because, well, they don't still exist. We were never a chimpanzee. We were some common ancestor back here. And then all of these groups of organisms came off of it, right? And so we see our Ardipithecus, right? Which is probably our last common ancestor, or our closest common ancestor to the hominids, to the great apes. Oops. I can't spell today. That's the wrong great. Last common ancestor to the great apes. Okay, and then we're going to see as we go through, the Australopithecus, and then one of these, Africanus, is going to develop into Paranthropus, right? And then one of these develops into our early Homo habilis, Rodamphus, and Erectus. And Erectus is going to split into our groups here. And you're going to see Neanderthal and Homo sapiens are going to be our last group with Florensis in there. And this is kind of this development that we have, right? And so we want to see this as while one individual group does start to make it into the next one, it's not a direct line, right? It looks something like our phylogenetic tree here, where a chimpanzee is the result of a completely different set of branching, and it's got its bonobo cousin next to it. And then you could see Ardipithecus, right, to Australopithecus. And we go over here. Oh, and I always forget this. Paranthropus is now in its own clade over there that died off. And we're going to see Australopithecus africanus, right, sometimes called Lucy, is here. That's where that Lucy or intermediate. A lot of people say humans don't have an intermediate. Well, Lucy's an intermediate between our hominid. And in fact, we found this guy who's another intermediate. We found this one and that one who's an intermediate. Lucy is probably the most well-developed intermediate because it's a complete skeleton, right? We've seen complete skeletons of habilis, erectus, right? And so we have all of these intermediates between our hominid and great ape ancestor back here and modern man. Now, modern man, we oftentimes look at it where Neanderthal dies off, but really there's a lot of evidence that there was inbreeding here. And so modern Homo sapiens actually have a lot of Neanderthal genes. And so we see that the developed brow ridge, the what they call the Roman nose, are probably Neanderthal traits. And so we see that very heavily in the European region where Neanderthal was as Homo sapiens moved in. And we see this, this development. So this is kind of our phylogenetic tree. One of the things that we do, and we develop this by our certain facial structures, right? And so when we look at the facial structures of those Australopithecus, right, one thing that we see is kind of this elongated mandibular ridge that creates this long, almost snout-like mouth. Now, it is being pushed in comparison. All of our monkeys are going to have that reduced snout, But we start to see this development of kind of this shortening of the bone this way as it's being pushed in. And we see that here as we get to the robust or later Australopithecus, we see less distance between the lower orbit and the upper jaw than we do here, as opposed to the width of the orbit from here to here, right? And so we see this as we look at the width of the orbit increases to the length of the orbit to the upper mandible. And then so we see that development. And then as we get into the Homo line, we continue to see this development, the enlarged cranial space, right? So the cranial enlargement. This gives us more space for a brain, right? And you can see in Homo sapiens, it's huge in comparison to over here. So again, another measurement that we look at is cranial depth, like this. It gives us, so we'll measure front to back, top to bottom, and this gives us a space in here for the brain. And so as we're moving, the brain space, it generally enlarges, right? And then when we get over here, we've got the huge brain space, right? And so that's what we're looking at when we look at it. These are some important structures. And if we were in a lab, I would be giving you guys multiple different skulls to measure to kind of get an idea of how much cranial capacity it has, right? Now, the current most robust theory of human evolution is that we evolved somewhere in kind of this West African region, right? And then migrated up into North Africa, and then into Europe, Russia, Asia, and then from Asia into the Middle East, and then over into the Americas. And so when we look at the map here, so as humans move throughout the world, we see that we started down here in this East African region. And I said earlier, West African. We see that's about 200,000 years ago. And then they migrated south and migrated west. About 70,000 years ago, we start to see populations appear in West Africa. And then they migrated north out of Africa. And this migration kind of split into three paths. So one went towards Europe, right? And we see this migration of humans out of the Middle East about 50,000 years ago and into Europe, where they interacted with Neanderthal. And there was thought to be inbreeding. And this is going to give a lot of Europeans this very unique set of traits. The Roman nose, the bridge row that we have, and some have even suggested the browner hair color and the lighter skin are all Neanderthal traits, along with a bunch of others. The rest of the group kind of migrated east through Asia. Okay, so we have some that kind of migrated down into India and then moved down through the islands and then settled about 50,000 years ago in Australia, right? We have another group that kind of migrated around the same time into the Pacific island range of Fiji and places like that, and became seafaring folks of the Southeast Asian, and they moved between a lot of these little islands all the way over to Hawaii, which is over here. And so they were very migratory across the seas. And then we see what became a lot of today's modern Asians start to move up into Russia and through East Asia about 30,000 years ago, and they start to settle in China. We see Korea and our Japanese region come up across Russia and cross the Bering Strait. And as they cross the Bering Strait, we get into our Native Americans, where we get our Inuits up in the Alaskan region. We get our American Indians or Native Americans as they move down. We get into our Hispanic regions, the Mayan culture, uh, and then down into South America, and we see this movement, right? And this is kind of what we thought, and we've tracked a lot of these by looking at genes, and we've seen like genes that may appear similar that are slightly different. And so we're getting a more robust way of looking at this by things like those 23andMe and genetic modifiers, where people are paying to get their genetics looked at. And it's really helping us understand this. One of the things that I do kind of like to show is that when you think about this, all humans throughout the entire world, no matter what we look like, no matter where we came from, all originated in one location. We were one small population here in East Africa that migrated throughout the world. And so we have this similar thing, and our important structures that make us Homo sapiens were all developed back here, right? Our intelligence, our complex tool use, our complex languages, our ability to teach using verbal languages, all developed when Homo sapiens became something. And so we tend to focus on the superficial diversity, our skin color, our hair color, our eye color, um, because these are simple identifiers that we use like all other animals, right? A lot of animals are going to look at slight variations. Do you have a dot here? Do you have this color there? What color is your fur or skin? In order to create groups that we come in. And this is a very basal way of thinking. And these are largely developed based off the environment around you, right? How much sun do I have? What do I need to protect versus, do I need to protect myself against UV radiation, or do I need to create vitamin D? These things generate skin color, and so we need to understand that about 5% of our genome distinguishes us in all these different regions: Middle East, African, European, Asian, North American, South American. But 95% of our genome is very similar, and it all arrived in this East African region. And that variation is important to keep our species healthy. And the difference in cultures and perspectives are important to help us overcome problems, right? We need to elevate our thinking beyond these basic uh, drives of clan and uh, sexual attractiveness to be with like, and elevate and understand that all humans are capable of the same level of intelligence, level of competence, level of contributing to society. And some of our most complex problems are going to need that diverse cultural uh, expertise to overcome. And so, I focus on this development so that we understand that humans are one thing and that diversity is important, and that acknowledging our differences as different and a different perspective and something that we should talk about, but also kind of at the same time ignoring it in, defining our humanity, because we are all human. Hopefully this helps, and you guys can see how important it is, or how we kind of all are one group and how we all kind of came from one area, and it gives you a little bit better perspective. This is what I have for you guys today. I wish you the best. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you guys next time.